Hi, everybody. Today I'm doing a reading update video. The last time I did one of these, you might have noticed my setting was a little bit different. My husband and I just moved into this house, so this will be my new filming room. I know I need to probably work on the shelf in the background. I do have a shelf back there. It's very small with my books on it, but I'll probably get something else set up eventually, but this will work for now. I did show this setup actually in my live show with Alan over the weekend. If you joined us, thank you, by the way, to everyone who chimed in the chat. It meant so much to me to see that so many people were there. And thank you to those who commented too on the video. It was so touching to me because I was partly nervous that doing that live stream, nobody was going to watch it live. But fortunately, a lot of people did. And I just had the best time chatting with Alan about books and things and answering some questions with him. So that was so much fun. And what have I been reading recently? Well, the last time I did one of these updates, I talked about a couple of books that I was picking up. And one of those was the manga Orange Volume 2. And so I did read this. This is the concluding manga addition to this, and I really enjoyed it. Now, this is a manga dealing with a young teenage protagonist who receives a letter from her future self from 10 years in the future, telling her how to prevent the suicide of a close loved one, of a classmate. And so it really deals with some heavy themes, as you can tell. And it is kind of controversial because there is this implication that perhaps your friends are responsible or can influence somebody dying by suicide. And I can understand why this is a controversial story for that reason, but I still really enjoyed the way it was handled. I still thought it touched on friendship in a very beautiful way. And I still appreciated that we are meant to see how important each moment is. This story, I think, is really one about learning to live without regrets, learning to make sure that you make the decisions you want to make in the moment, and also just recognizing the impact that your life has on other people around you. So I still really enjoyed the story, even though I can understand why some people don't. And I thought that the way that time travel was handled was very well done, because I'm okay with time travel not being thoroughly explained or shown to us. In this story, it was left a little more mysterious, though it does talk a little bit about wormholes and time paradoxes and things like that. And I really enjoyed the way that the characters related to the letters and the way that that relationship kind of shifted over time and was questioned over time. It's hard to recommend this to people, but if this sounds interesting to you at all, then definitely check it out. Another story I mentioned the last time that I did a reading update was The Child Thief by Brahm. I picked up the audiobook for this, and it was a bit of a challenge for me because I wasn't in much of an audiobook mood at the time I picked this up. But because I was moving the last couple of weeks, or during that week that I picked it up, it was just the easiest thing to do rather than sit down and read. So I'm glad I did pick it up, and I'm glad I didn't DNF it, because I did consider doing that a few times. I wasn't sure that I was quite enjoying listening to the audiobook, but that had nothing to do with the narrator, because the narrator for this was fantastic. The narrator for this, I wrote this down, Kirby Hayborn, and he was fantastic. He characterized Peter Pan's voice really well. The only reason I considered putting it down was because I just didn't feel like I was in the mood for audiobooks. I felt more in the mood to read with my eyes. But I'm really glad I stuck with it, because I think like the psychology of the characters was fascinating. The way that the author was able to kind of pull your moral strings at times and make you feel like you're kind of rooting for a character, but then maybe you shouldn't be. And there were some really interesting surprises towards the end. There was some interesting world building. It was interesting because the world building that was explained didn't happen till like halfway through the book, which was an interesting choice, but I really enjoyed that part. And it does have allusions to some King Arthur too, with Avalon and Excalibur. I really enjoyed it, though. I think Brahm is a very talented writer. But if you're interested in picking up Brahm, although the audiobook production was excellent, I think the way to go with Brahm is the physical copy, because Brahm is an amazing science fiction and fantasy artist. So I missed out on that experience of seeing the artwork as I read. And I really want to pick up a physical copy someday so that I can experience that. I would actually recommend Brahm to Stephen King fans because he did such an amazing job portraying these young teenage boy protagonists. And it is just, by the way, I don't think I mentioned this, but this is a very dark Peter Pan retelling. And I thought it was really clever the way he did this, the way he took that story and expanded and subverted the tropes of Peter Pan. And it's also interesting to note too that the original Peter Pan, for those of you who read the J.M. Barrie version, it is pretty dark in tone. It's not quite as lighthearted as the Disney version, but I really think that the direction Brahm took it, he took it to a whole new level. And this is a very dark book. This does have trigger warnings. It does open up with some very dark material, which was another reason I almost put it down. I thought this was almost too dark for me, but again, I'm so glad that I continued on. I do want to pick up a physical copy of this book at some point. I do want to get into more of Brahm's works because I think Brahm is very, very talented. I really enjoyed this story. And then another book that I picked up and read and reviewed actually was Dreams Implied by Michael R. Fletcher. This is the second book in the Obsidian Path series, which is a very grim, dark, self-published fantasy series. And I was so surprised by this book. Okay, so I did read and review the first book in the Obsidian Path series, Blackstone Heart, earlier this year. And this is a story about a man who is buried underground. He digs his way out, doesn't know who he is, doesn't know anything. You're seeing the world through his perspective because it's told in first person. And what he finds is that his Blackstone heart is shattered with fragments of it all scattered all over the world. But each time he merges with a fragment of his Blackstone heart, he unveils part of the mystery of his identity. And the story, the series so far, seems to be taking an interesting exploration on identity and as well as a lot of moral questions, because this person is starting to realize that maybe this person he wasn't quite such a good person. So it's very interesting in that regard. There were a couple of things that weren't quite to my reading taste that I explain in those reviews. I don't want to give away any spoilers here. But overall, I was very pleasantly surprised with the end of both books, but She Dreams in Blood was such a shocking ending for me. I was really in shock. I couldn't sleep for a while after finishing that end. I finished it late at night and I was just left in a state of shock, like I said. So I'm actually really looking forward to reading on in this series. I'm really looking forward to the third book coming out. I think that Michael R. Fletcher has some fantastic ideas. They're very wild. It is very dark. It is grimdark. So make sure that you are prepared for a lot of blood, necromancy, gore. He's not afraid of going there. He's not afraid of going into some very dark to some very dark things, but at the same time, I don't think he takes himself too seriously either. I feel like there is some humor sprinkled in. So if that appeals to you, definitely check out the series. Another book I started not long after that was the audiobook of Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert to continue the Dune series. Now, unfortunately, the audiobook just wasn't working for me. I got a few chapters in and I couldn't do it. It felt a little too abstract for me through audio. So I am going to pick up the ebook soon. And meanwhile, I am actually reading the book Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This was a gift to me from Alan at the Library of Alexandria for my birthday, Alan and Christina. And it's really good so far. I'm halfway through the book. I'm buddy reading this with Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads, and I'm enjoying it. What's interesting about Guns of the Dawn is that it reads to me very much like historical fiction more than fantasy. I'm used to reading a lot of fantasy these days that is very weird and surreal, and this is not that. This feels very grounded almost in our world, but like probably in the French Revolution times or something, but it is fantasy. It's not in our world, and there is magic. There is weird stuff that starts to happen, especially halfway through the book. It also deals with some really interesting themes regarding war, revolution, family dynamics. there's a really interesting female friendship in there, which I'm always looking for that in fantasy. I don't feel like we see many female friendships in fantasy, but I did see one in there. And overall, like I said, I'm enjoying it so far, curious to see where it goes. Another book I picked up while in transition, while moving, I didn't finish, but I picked up the ebook of Conan by Robert E. Howard. And I just picked this up because this is a whole bunch of short stories. I think a lot of these were published in magazines. And so from what I understand, it doesn't really matter what reading order you read Conan stories in. I did read one story and the chapter of another story. And I have to say that even though in that one story, Conan is kind of a problematic character, it's not going to appeal to everybody, but I really loved Robert E. Howard's writing style. I loved it. It wasn't as one note as I predicted a Conan character to be. And I can definitely see parallels between Conan and Karsa Orlong from Malazan Book of the Fallen. Definitely, especially with questions regarding civilization. Fantastic stuff. So I don't know that I'll be picking up Conan really soon, but I'm enjoying what I've read so far. I also watched a wonderful review of Conan earlier this year over on Michael K. Vaughan's channel. I will link it below. I highly recommend checking that out if you're interested. He just recently did his top 10 fantasy of all time. I was happy to see that Malazan made the list, but he put Conan as #1. And just FYI, he's only read 2 Malazan books so far, The Gardens of the Moon and Dead House Gates, but I have a feeling he's going to love Malazan if he continues on. But yeah, I highly recommend Michael K. Vaughan's video. Also, Mike from Mike's Book Reviews did a wonderful Conan video that also made me very curious. And I think what Mike said holds true, this idea that Robert E. Howard is able to pack a ton of action within a couple of pages in such an efficient way. It's incredible. It's amazing the way he's able to do that. So I definitely see what Mike is talking about just from the little tiny sample that I read. And so that just about wraps up what I've been reading recently. Upcoming after finishing Guns of the Dawn, like I said, I want to return to Dune Messiah and I want to read the ebook of that. It is good so far from what I could tell. I think it's an interesting expansion on Dune. I'm really curious to see where it goes. And I wouldn't have picked this up at all, except that I got invited to a Dune Messiah discussion, and Dune Messiah is a fairly short book from what I can see. So I don't see a problem with trying to insert that into the month. And then after that, I need to get to to Toll the Hounds by Stephen Erickson. So book 8 in Malazan Book of the Fallen. I'm very eager to get to this book. It's huge. Of course, I probably won't finish it in October. I hope I finish it in November. I'm afraid I'm going to be a little behind on my goal to finish Malazan Book of the Fallen by the end of the year, but I'm going to try my best. And I'm very excited to get to this. Very, very, very excited. I think I might want to pick up Uzumaki. I would love to pick this up because I know a lot of people are right now, and it just seems perfect for spooky season, but we'll see if I can get my hands on a library copy. I really don't want to spend money on manga, especially if I don't know if it's going to appeal to me or not. But if I can, like I said, get my hands on a library copy, that would be fantastic. And another book I would love to get to if time allows, which I don't know that it will, but I really have my eyes on Shade by Chad Nicholas. He gave me a e-arc of this, and so I want to honor that by reading that soon. Overall, I've been seeing wonderful reviews for that going around. Chad Nicholas is a wonderful self-published author, and it's perfect for spooky season. Again, I read his book Nightmare last year around this time, and it was a lot of fun. So I've heard the same thing about Shade, that it's quite a page turner. If I can fit it in, I will, but I really, really need to get to Toll the Hounds. That's going to be a huge priority for me. And that just about wraps up the books that I've been reading recently and what I plan to read next. So please let me know your thoughts on any of the books I mentioned. If you've read any of them, I'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.